And welcome to another episode of Patriots 4th and 2. I am your host today, Derek Havens, and joining me, as always, is Mr. Steve Balestrieri. We are both PatsFans.com bloggers. Today we're going to be talking about Patriots Training Camp, which began yesterday, July 26th. Today is the 27th. That we are recording at 11:36 Eastern. Steve, how are we doing today, my friend?
We're doing great. Football season is back. No more off season, so we're into real football stuff. Although no pads will come on until next week, but that's okay. At least they're back on the field, and we're looking at least initially the players that are going to be on the roster.
Yeah, absolutely. And, man, I would give a whole lot of money to go back and be at training camp with you and Russ in the bleachers right about now, right on that side, right on that side under the stadium. We always had a good time. It was always good talking with some of the beat writers, picking their brains, them picking our brains, us talking about what we're seeing live. It's funny. I wanted to share this because I was listening to a conversation about what the media is allowed to and not allowed to put on social media during these practices. And though it's my favorite training camp memory, which is why I'm sharing this as well. So it's like a 2-in-1 thing. But before, the media couldn't put out like certain things and from the practice, they would get in trouble. Stacey James would come up to them and give them a quick karate chop to the neck.
Yeah.
So I go back to the practice before the 2014 season where I saw the double pass. And I don't know if you or Russ were there. I also don't remember who was there because I know that sometimes, one of us would be missing. But I saw the double pass, Brady to Edelman to Amendola, live. And I remember tweeting it out, and Ben Volen was so pissed about not being able to talk about it, but fans could, which they have now changed the rule, by the way. If it's a public practice, they can say whatever because fans are going to be able to say whatever, so they can't, so it is kind of a moot point. But it was one of my favorite moments because I think I tweeted something out to the effect of, they're, save that for your playbook in November. Well, I was wrong by a couple months because it turned out to be January because it was the AFC divisional round against the Ravens. And I don't know, there was something, Steve, about when we were covering the team, at that close of a point where seeing something like that and then seeing it in such a critical moment, I just felt like that was just my favorite creme de la creme training camp moment.
Yeah, it's it's really cool because they obviously really like that play, and then they put it in their back pocket for when they really needed it.
Yep.
And that Ravens game in the playoffs, such a great football game. They dusted that one off, and that
perfectly executed.
It was perfectly executed, and everyone involved, Brady, Edelman, Amendola, and it came at such a critical time. I thought that was. Yeah, again, that was one of the plays that stood out. And that same, I believe it was the same season because isn't that when they had Brandon Browner?
Yes. Yep.
Right. And we saw, one of the knocks on the Patriots defense, they didn't have anybody that kind of fit that enforcer role, somebody who's going to light people up. And then again, in training camp, and it was right in front of the three of us, where, the media was reporting what they see. And in the early days of training camp, the defensive backs weren't able to put their hands on anybody. Yep. So the receivers were looking really good. And that's, media guys were reporting that because that's what's in front of you. And Brandon Browner took exception to that. And then right in front of us, what was that guy's name now? I just had it and I drew a blank. Kenbrell Tompkins.
Yeah.
Kenbrell Tompkins catches like a little swing pass, and Brandon Browner picks him up and slams him to the ground right in front of us. And
it was the loudest hit I've ever seen in person. That was another good one. That's another good one.
We all cracked up, and I remember Chad O'Shea was the wide receivers coach. He was livid, and Brandon Browner looked right directly where we were all sitting with the media guys and said, Write that one up.
He was a scary dude.
Yes.
He's like a forgotten piece for that season. That's kind of I don't want to go off too much on a totally random
Right.
tangent
But
because but that he is kind of a forgotten piece for that season. But let's not forget it. His jam at the line of scrimmage is
against
one of the
Seattle.
biggest reasons that Malcolm Butler intercepted that pass.
Yep.
So the way he played so physically on one side, and they were able to have Revis kind of do his thing. That's still, man, that's still terrific. But anyway, so I wanted to share. I didn't want to go off on too much of a tangent, get away from, the present day. But I felt like it was, a couple of interesting stories, a couple of interesting notes, to talk about training camp and Steve, the team's back, and I feel like this is like the time of year where some people, like I think Doug Kyde referred to it as Christmas morning. Glad he's back in the area full time, by the way.
Yeah.
It's like first day of training camp, then first day of pads, and then you're going to be talking about, your joint practices and your preseason games, and then all of a sudden the season starts, and it's just one thing after another, and it just really starts to ramp up. And I know we're still 6-7 weeks away, probably about 7 weeks away from the season starting, but at the same time it's exciting. It's an exciting time. And look, every single NFL team, every fan base should be optimistic at this time of year. Even if you don't think you're a Super Bowl contender, you should still be optimistic about what you have to look forward to. And for the Patriots, I think there's a lot to look forward to, and there's some things that we have a lot of questions about, and Steve and I are going to be talking about some of those questions at some point. But before we get into that, Steve, I want to go ahead and get your opening thoughts on training camp. They just wrapping up their second practice today, another practice tomorrow and Saturday. Tomorrow, and then they're off Saturday and back Sunday. Correct?
Yes,
So we're going to go ahead and talk about yesterday's practice, today's practice a little bit, and then next week, probably around Wednesday, we'll do another show as we kind of continue to do our weekly show, weekly time, etc. So give me your opening take on Patriots training camp, Steve.
Yeah. Today, I guess they were working on a lot of red zone stuff, red zone situations. It was good to see that Juju Smith-Schuster is a full participant. He caught a couple of touchdown passes in the red zone, something you always look for. That obviously it's something they need to improve on. Kyle Duggar today made his second interception in a row, or second day in a row, of Mac Jones inside the end zone. I was reading, I think it was Evan Lazar said it would have been a sack in a game time situation, but Mac threw across his body and Duggar easily intercepted it. Good to see Duggar making plays. And as you said offline, it's time they really paid that guy. And let's hope that gets done soon.
Absolutely.
And yesterday, I thought Mac Jones made a good statement. He was asked about his relationship with Bill. And, he said that they put last season behind them and it's a fresh start for everyone. And, Bill said in typical Bill speak, kind of the same thing, but yeah. But during practice yesterday, Jones was heavily involved with Bill O'Brien. And that's always a good thing to see. The three of them are getting together. They're talking about defenses. They're talking about situations. You got to love that. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I would also say this too, Steve, that, I think a lot of eyes are on Mac Jones, Bill O'Brien, obviously. Okay. But I think there's a lot of really interesting camp battles, and I'm really curious to see how it all plays out. And there's a lot of new faces defensively. I think they have a lot of their main core intact. They have two young rookies that I think people are really excited about, but you also have a huge void in Devin McCourty not being there. So how does that work out? And I think you do as well, some pretty high hopes for like a guy like Jabril Peppers. We both think extremely highly of Kyle Duggar. So and he's in a year where I know he's going to want to show out because he's going to probably get, I would say, somewhere in the neighborhood of top 8 at least safety money in the offseason. I mean he's right in that 5 to maybe 10 or 12 range, in terms of safeties in the league. So if I had to rank him, I'd have to look at a list, but I think that's where he's going to get paid. And, I mean, if he hits the open market, he's probably going to get top 5 money because that's how it works in free agency. So, we have a lot of questions. Someone like a Josh Uche is going to be really fascinating this year. Can he build on what he did last year? Because I don't know if people saw the Alex Highsmith extension from Pittsburgh, or I forget the guy's name because it's not an easy one. The guy from Seattle, both very similar players to Josh Uche. Both just got paid about $15 million a year with incentives to get up to 20. I mean, that's Uche's market. That's what he's going to get on the open market if he has anything similar to a year like this, like last year. So there's a lot of storylines, Steve, to kind of pay attention about, and I think I'm kind of burying the lead because one of the things we were both fascinating about was Trent Brown. And I thought that was one of the best storylines coming out of yesterday. Trent Brown, was able to pass his conditioning test, was out there getting reps at left tackle. Looks like, according to Andy Hart of WEEI, Nick Fitzy-Stevens, same network, they were saying on their radio show and their podcast, Six Rings and Football Things, when I was catching up to a few things yesterday, I was listening to them, and they said that they thought that, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but according to them, from what I heard, they thought he looked like he had lost a couple of pounds and he was in good shape. So I think that is incredibly important. We know the difference, Steve, of Trent Brown's buy-in versus Trent Brown just kind of being there. And they need him desperately on this line. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think the interior line we feel pretty good about. Tackle situation, not so much. If we feel good about the left guard, center, and right guard, and we have a bought-in Trent Brown at left tackle, well, maybe we're not as worried about the offensive line as we thought, because we knew that it doesn't matter how much better Bill O'Brien is. If Mac Jones has no time in the pocket, they're porked. So who's that right tackle going to be? We're going to find out. I still think it might be Riley Reif's job to lose. Calvin Anderson's kind of my dark horse. I still think that's going to be the guy. But what do you think, Steve, about some of the things that I've shared?
Absolutely. I think, I totally agree with the Trent Brown thing, because as I talked to you offline earlier this week, the big thing for me was, after, he looked so slow and out of shape during the OTA, would he pass his conditioning test? And that's a big thing for the offensive and defensive linemen, because those guys, their conditioning test is tough for them because they're not used to running the sprints that, the skill position guys do. So the fact that he passed it and he was on the field and, plugged right into his left tackle position, to me was a big positive. Now, they're still in, as Bill said yesterday, they're still in extended OTA mode because they're not in pads. So the real, test for him will be once the pads come on. But the fact that he's out there, he passed his conditioning test, and he seems to be moving quite well. And as you said, Andy Hart and Fitzy both made a mention of that. That to me is optimistic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I think Mike Reese had a very interesting, it's always interesting and always an astute point coming from Mike. He mentioned how he thought that they always usually start with a lot of red zone work, Steve. And they did yesterday, and they did again today. I think today was a little more higher red zone. I think yesterday was more condensed, which always makes it a little bit easier on the defense. The offense been up and down so far, which, new system, they're working through some things. They're trying to figure things out. That's not a surprise, unless you have Tom Brady under center. The defense is going to be always going to have a leg up on the offense early in camp. If it stays like this in the next couple of weeks, we can be concerned then. If it's just the first few days, then so be it. But they did a lot of higher red zone work today. Mike Reese pointed out that I thought was fascinating, and a good point by him, which was, last year the team was 32nd in the NFL in red zone efficiency, and to really focus on it right at the beginning of camp. Now, again, as he said, and which I would like to put as context, they almost always start with a lot of red zone work. So that's not surprising necessarily, but from what all the beat reporters we're talking about, you're talking about, an extended time in that red zone for the first 2 days. And I think that just kind of highlights that, Bill understands, like, look, at the end of the day, it's football math. We talk about it all the time. 7 beats 3 every single time. And when you're not going to be, I mean, I think this offense will be improved. Okay. I'm sure you feel like it will be improved as well. Hard to get worse, honestly. But I think that if you can start converting, some of those field goals and touchdowns, you're going to be more competitive in those tougher games. And the AFC East is going through an absolute gauntlet this season, and they're going to have to be better and convert more of those chances, because they're not going to be a high flying offense. We think they're maybe better, but they're not going to be one of the top 5 offenses in the NFL. But they can be certainly better. And in order to get better, that red zone efficiency is going to have to be significantly improved. And so I thought that was an interesting point by Mike to kind of focus on that early in camp.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, good point. As you said, improving from last year isn't setting the bar very high, but at the same time, I think the offense, as we talked about pretty much ad nauseum throughout the season and through the off season, they were better than the sum of their parts, and it's usually the opposite. Excuse me. Let me reverse that. They were worse than the sum of their parts, where usually it's the opposite. They're usually better than the sum of their parts offensively. And I thought, bringing O'Brien back was definitely a step in the right direction. And the most important thing is it's reinvigorated the confidence of the players. Now they seem to be behind O'Brien. They seem to be behind Mac. So, it gives them the confidence moving forward that everyone's going to, play together. Everything's going to gel. Of course, it's going to take some time. It always does in training camp. And as you said, the defense always has the upper hand in the first few days of camp. We've been going there forever, and that's traditionally the way it always goes. So don't read too much into it either way. So we'll see how it all plays out, but I'm excited for the offense because I think they have more speed this year.
Yep. No, they do. Certainly more talent. No question there. So, I mean, man, I just feel like there's so many different directions we can go. Well, let's get into some of your, I guess, kind of your thoughts on some of these biggest questions around camp. But before we do that, I just want to go ahead and ask everybody, please subscribe to us on YouTube. Like, share, leave us a review, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, whatever you listen to podcasts. Please go ahead, leave us a review. Keeps us high up in the podcast ranking so other Patriots fans can find us. Appreciate that. All right, so Steve, let's get into this. Biggest question surrounding the Patriots right now. Let's just go back and forth for a couple. We don't have to go anything crazy. Why don't you shared a couple with me yesterday? Why don't you start with your biggest question surrounding the Patriots at this moment?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is the tackle position. I mean,
Sure.
We talked about that earlier, but I don't think you can mention it enough. I mean, as you said, Bill O'Brien can draw up the perfect play and the skill guys could be all working perfectly. But if Mac gets hit as soon as he hits the back foot on a 3 or 5 step drop, you're not going anywhere, So I think that's a really big piece of the pie this summer. And we talked about Trent Brown, at least initially. There's room for some optimism there. We were pretty pessimistic at the end of, mini camp regarding him. And again, with Riley Reif, Calvin Anderson, Connor McDermott, I think that's open. And I'm with you. I think the veteran, Reif, who's been around the league for a long time, he's been a starter for a long time. I think he's going to be, the guy, at least initially, to start the season. Where it goes after that, it could be anyone's game. But, McDermott played pretty well last year down the stretch. Not saying he was great, but he was pretty good. And Anderson is an intriguing guy. I mean, he was like the swing tackle for Denver, and then he ended up starting several games. So I'm not worried about him either. I think he's going to work out just fine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the tackle, if you want to rank the tackle one, I wouldn't push back on it too much, and I don't even mean you. I mean any of our listeners either.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would start with my biggest question being, the Bill O'Brien, Mac Jones, connection. Like how does it look? What are the improvements? How's their relationship? How does Mac Jones's development? I think that you could argue both things. I think they're both equally incredibly important. I would probably argue the quarterback situation is even more important just because you want to know if he's the future of the franchise. But I still think that the strong concerns we both have about the tackle position that you and I have been seemingly talking about for months, really since free agency kind of died out. We've been talking about this being a severe concern, and I think that with Mac Jones and Bill O'Brien, I think Bill O'Brien is going to use a lot of what he did at Alabama. I think he's going to blend in some of what Mac Jones did his rookie year with McDaniels and some of his own stuff that he's brought along in the past, and maybe even a couple things from last year. I'm sure not much from last year, but maybe a couple of things. And I'm sure they've sat down and had countless hours of meetings going through what works, what doesn't work, and how they're going to do it. And now it's just about getting everybody on the same page. And, that's why I'm not really worried about a slow start for the offense, Steve, in training camp early. But I do want to say that I feel I'm hesitant, but I'm slightly optimistic about this whole thing. I just am really hoping that we see Mac feel comfortable and take a step forward, because even if you don't think his ceiling is high and you're not a fan of him, I mean Mac, and I don't mean you, Steve, I mean the general you.
Right.
I still think that he's capable of being an NFL quarterback, and if you have the right pieces around him, I still think he can be a franchise quarterback. But where he falls on that spectrum, I think, is still to be determined. But I certainly know that he was better than what he was last year, and I know that because we saw it the year prior. But this year he needs to be better than his first year. I've heard a lot of people say, hope Mac Jones returns to what we saw in his first year. I hope so too, but he needs to surpass that. It needs to be, at the end of the day, I forget how many picks. I think it was 13, but it was like 25 touchdowns. I want to say like 13 interceptions. Like, you got to be better than that, And I think that they will be, but we need to see the offense look like a professional unit, Steve, because that's something that we didn't see, last season.
No, the offense was abysmal last year, and that's where it comes into the confidence thing, because I don't think the offensive linemen, the skill guys, or Mac were confident in what was going on with the offense a year ago. We heard reports after the fact that in training camp, in the meeting, some of the offensive linemen were, well, what if they do this, meaning the opposing defense? And they said, well, they didn't have an answer for it. Well,
yeah.
we'll get to it.
Yeah. And by the way, just for clarification's sake, Mac Jones last year, 22 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. So it wasn't 25, it was 22. His passer rate, his completion percentage, or I'm sorry, no, not last year. Sorry, his rookie year was 22 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, 3,801 yards. So last year he had 8 less touchdowns, 2 less interceptions, and a little over 800 less passing yards. So he was significantly worse last year than his rookie year. Just thought I'd throw it out there as we're talking about it.
And I think Jones is a cerebral quarterback.
Sure.
That's his strength, his intelligence. And, I think once all the pieces fit together, I think him and O'Brien are going to get along just fine. I don't see any issues with those guys, because they both speak Alabama, I guess you could say, that offense that was run down there. So I think there's a lot of carryover to what O'Brien's going to do here. It's still going to be the Patriots offense, but they'll mix in some of the concepts that we saw. I really think Mac is primed for a really good season. I know they're facing a lot of tough teams, but I think he's going to be just fine. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do once again with a good offensive coordinator. Going back to his rookie year, one of the things that we talked about all through the season until maybe the last quarter was that they kind of kept the training wheels on him. They wanted to keep his confidence going. I think those days are long gone, obviously. So, with O'Brien, he should be in the neighborhood of 28 to 30 touchdowns this year. I fully expect that.
Yeah, I do as well. Give me your next one, Steve. Give me your next one on another big concern that you have aside from that we've talked about tackles, Mac Jones.
Yeah,
What are we thinking now?
I think you can go back to Devin McCourty. I know we're both high on this defense, but I mean, you have a guy that was a stalwart back there for so many years. Um, you know, you don't replace a guy like Devin McCourty overnight. It just doesn't happen. And so, who's going to be that guy? Or is it going to be multiple guys? Are they going to be multiple back there? Are we going to see, depending on the opponent, Jalen Mills one game, Kyle Duggar another? Are they going to flip flop that around? We don't know yet. But my money's on Duggar. I hope he morphs into that deep role because we know he can play in the box. He's outstanding in that role. But they have a couple of other guys, as you mentioned, Jabril Peppers, Adrian Phillips, Joshua Bledsoe. Those guys can also do that, but I don't think any of those guys can play that deep role where Duggar has the speed and athleticism to do that. So I'm kind of hoping he gets that role, but we might see, as I said, multiple guys. Matthew Judon talked in OTAs about the unicorns and everyone playing a different role every day. We could see a lot of that.
Yeah, no, I certainly think that's a good one. And I still think people are sleeping on Josh Bledsoe. I still think Josh Bledsoe is very much potentially going to make this team, and I think they like him. And we've seen a little bit from him. This will be a very interesting camp for him. Be a very interesting preseason for him because I would strongly bet if he does not make this team, he will land on a 53-man roster in this league. I still think he's a good player. They have a lot of depth at safety, and that's a big question for me. So I think that's a good one, Steve. And
I think Bledsoe makes the team.
Yeah, I think so right now. We haven't done a 53-man projection. I'm sure at some point we'll probably do that, some kind of collaboration, or we'll figure something out on a show moving forward. But something to think about. And we're not really going in necessarily a particular order here. But I think that the running back situation, the third down running back is another one where we talk about, Ramondre Stevenson. We know what he is. And I hope he doesn't touch the damn ball outside of a walkthrough in training camp or preseason. Keep him in the tub, all right? Someone, get him a full-time foot masseuse. I don't know what we need to do, but just give him relax because he was upward of 280 touches last year. He's going to be in that same neighborhood again, and approaching 300. He's going to have his workload, and he should, but he still needs a couple of series off a game. We still need to potentially work in a third down back here. Ty Montgomery is now officially listed as a receiver in your if you're keeping score at home, number 14 on the roster. I am curious if they feel Montgomery can bring more of a slot element to the offense, if they look at him as kind of a dual running back and receiver, if they think they're going to move him around. He's made some plays. He made a couple plays in the low red zone yesterday. I'm sure he made some today, but I haven't caught up on all the notes 100%. I also know that you and I have talked about this in the past. What do Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris bring to the table? There have been rumors about Dalvin Cook. There have been rumors about other potential running backs. They worked out Leonard Fournette. So they're sniffing around that market. I think, Steve, and I want to give you credit for this. Because if I'm not mistaken, and stop me if I'm giving you credit that I shouldn't, but I'm pretty sure you had talked about they were sniffing around veterans, and I think you said on our last show or the show prior that you thought that if they were kicking the tires on veterans, they were still going to wait a couple weeks into training camp to see if it was one of those things where, if somebody got hurt, obviously. But I think your point was, let's see what the younger kids got, and if we don't feel confident in them, then we'll go the veteran route. I think you said something like that. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and I
Not
think you're spot on. I really do.
not in those many words,
No, because I'm long-winded. We know this. Those who've listened to the show for 10 years know I can talk. So
actually, we're approaching our 12-year mark now.
I know it's been a long time.
12 years we've been doing this,
which is incredible. But I'll tell you, it is one of those things, though, Steve, where I think for one, you nailed it. I do think Leonard Fournette would be a terrific option for them. I still don't see Dalvin Cook. He was on the Rich Eisen show this week, and in so many words, basically said that because Rich walked him into it, and Dalvin confirmed that the AFC East is likely where he's going to land. That he said in his own words, straight from the horse's mouth, that all 4 teams have shown interest. Matt Groh confirmed basically yesterday that they had talks with Dalvin Cook. But I think, like I said, I still think he probably ends up in Miami. If I really had to guess, it just makes a lot of sense. I'm pretty sure that's where he's from, and he played at Florida State. So from that standpoint, it makes a ton of sense. He's still young. I'm still surprised he's on the market, to be honest. I don't understand why Miles Sanders gets his contract and Dalvin Cook is sitting on the open market, because I'll take Dalvin Cook 10 out of 10 times, but that's just me. So I don't know. I don't really get the running back thing. There's a whole running back conversation that we could probably have at a different time. But I still think, Steve, I'm digressing here. The third down back role, to me, still very interesting for this team. And I'm curious who steps up, and I'm hoping it is the 2 second-year backs.
Yeah, and again, Ty Montgomery is always going to – his name's always going to be thrown about at that spot. I'm really hoping Pierre Strong makes that second-year jump, because we saw his tape. I mean, the guy had 10 touchdowns in college of more than 50 yards. He's got extensive speed when he gets the ball in space. And, he's kind of that tweener back, kind of like James White. Let me shut this. My robot vacuum's trying to get in here and make a bunch of noise.
It's got a mind of its own.
Yeah, but anyway, like James White, he has that tweener back. He can run between the tackles. He's not a big guy, but he's incredibly fast. So I'm really hoping for him, because he's one of those younger guys. Kevin Harris is obviously a big, tough, downhill running back. Not so much in the passing game, but a really good runner, that could spell Ramondre. But, while they're kicking the tires on a guy like Fournette, I would never say no to that, because you always look to improve your football team. It's not an indictment against the guys that are there, but we know Fournette is a really good football player. And, with him and Stevenson, 1A, 1B, however you want to rank them, that would make a dynamic duo, carrying the football. Fournette is a pretty good receiver as well. So, but going back to your earlier point of what we talked about last week, where teams are waiting, I heard that the Jets are still very much involved in Dalvin Cook.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're not sure if Breece Hall, returned from an ACL, if he's going to be 100% at the start of the season. And that is a big thing for the Jets, because he was dynamic when he was on the field last year until he got hurt. I think it was in mid-October. I could be wrong there, but, he seemed like he was primed for a huge season, and then he got hurt. If he's not 100% at the start of the season, that could open the door for, a guy like Fournette or, Dalvin Cook to step in.
Yeah, no, I still think that's certainly on the table, and that would make sense, for the Jets, Breece Hall coming off injury and all that. So I think that would make a ton of sense for them. Let's go ahead and step aside real quick for podcast purposes and take a quick break, and we'll be back with some more questions surrounding the Patriots and training camp beginning right after this. Okay, and we are back here on Patriots 4th and 2. Again, Derek Havens, Steve Balestrieri here with you, brought to you by PatsFans.com. We're talking about Patriots Training Camp opening up, Steve. We're 2 days into it. Now, another practice Friday, off Saturday, team returns Sunday. Sunday is first day for pads. Is that correct?
It probably will be because Bill
Yeah,
said they
by the letter of the CVA, they
yeah,
can't do padded practices the first 3 days.
yeah, and he said next week, but Sunday is the beginning of the week for most people. So
Yep.
I would assume Sunday they're putting pads on for the first time.
Yeah, no, I mean that would probably make the most sense. I'll tell you. I know we started the show like this a little bit, and we probably have about another 20 minutes or so before we wrap this up. But I loved one of my favorite things, and it's always better in pads. But another favorite memory I have, Steve, is just the one-on-ones, the one-on-one receiver cornerback reps. And it's always so good. It's a really exciting to see live and very much when the pads come on, they'll do some goal line drills. That always gets things going, and things will probably start to get pretty heated, I would say, in about 2 or 3 weeks, because it gets annoying when you keep going up against the same people and you're button heads and people forget. I think some people look at the emotion of sports sometimes and think it's too much or whatever. I don't look at it that way. I look at it as it's a competitive thing. These guys, and what people forget, I think, a lot about training camp, when people see these fights or anything like that, I think people lose sight of the focus that this is each one of these guys on the field right now. You're talking about give or take around 90 guys on 32 teams. So 32 times 90, whatever that is. All these guys are competing for about, half. Half of them are going to not have jobs, here in 2 months. And this is what they've been working for their whole life. They were all great high school athletes, or a lot of them were very good in college. Now they're here on the pro level. They're fighting, it's like they're battling it out for a spot to make a lot of money and pursue their passions that they've had it for a long time. So it's like it's always funny, Steve, when I hear people talk about like training camp fights, because I always am like, you're kind of losing sight of that. This is their literal dream, and it's all on the line. And I think sometimes people lose sight of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, other than each team has, their own stars that are basically untouchable. But for the rest of the guys, they're fighting for their livelihood. And you're talking with some of them making over millions of dollars. So that's I mean, do you want to lose out on a job like that? No. So, and for other guys, young guys trying to make it in the league for the very first time, they're going all out to get themselves out there. Like, if I don't make it with this team, I'm going to show enough that another team might want to pick me up. So, as you said, I mean, we're talking over 300 and maybe 40 guys, 60 guys, maybe 360 guys that are in training camps right now. Half of them are going to be unemployed in a month.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a
And
lot, and you have you have the roster, you have the 53-man roster, you have the practice squad, and there'll be guys floating in and out. But it's a competitive atmosphere, man, and it's hard, and I really get it, and it's always funny, because a lot of the players are usually pretty excited when training camp starts, because they're excited to get the year going, and fans are excited because football's around the corner, and then all of a sudden you talk about like the dog days of camp where you're halfway through it and you're kind of in the preseason, you're not in the regular season. I think
yeah,
that's when tempers start to flare, blood starts to boil, fans start to get a little antsy, and then you're kind of and then you turn that corner. But man,
right. And
it's
again, it
interesting.
goes, I mean, during training camp, the reporters, the guys, beat writers who are down there every day, they're reporting on what they see. And that's when the interior linemen get probably more mentions than they do all season.
Mm-hmm.
And, like just for instance, I'm not going to say this happened or whatever, just, Matthew Judon took Bill Murray to school 3 times in a row,
Yeah.
and one-on-one drills, or he took, Cole Strange, whatever. That guy sees that. And now he's getting fired up. So the next day he's going to fire off the ball, and he might give a little extracurricular in there after the snap is over, because it's frustration, it's intensity. That's what sports are all about. It's about that intensity and burning desire. So, I think that I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact because they think these guys are kind of like automatons, that they don't have feelings, they're not real people. When in fact, as you and I both know, when you're down close to it, you can hear everything that's going on down there and what's being said. And sometimes it's not very pretty.
Wow. I'm sorry. I'm not, I don't want to, I don't want to cut you off here, but I was just reading that Jalen Ramsey was carted off the field for the Dolphins.
Oh,
so that's not good for their
no.
one of their key offseason acquisitions. I don't know how serious it is, but never want to see a guy leave on a cart.
Yeah.
So something to
That's
monitor down in Miami. Anyway, I digress. Let's get into a couple more questions, Steve. Do you have any more questions surrounding the team? We're not going to go too long today. We'll be back with at least one show next week. I think we're just going to kind of play it by ear, depending on how camp goes and stuff. But I would say next Wednesday is a good bet. So 6 days from now for another show if we can swing it. But let's talk about it, Steve. What other questions do you have? We've talked about the tackle position, Mac Jones, Bill O'Brien. We've talked about the safeties, gotten into the running back situation. Again, no particular order. Just another question you have surrounding the Patriots right now.
Well, during the offseason, we were talking about wide receivers all spring long. I'm glad to see that whatever issues Juju Smith-Schuster had in, the spring, they erred on the side of caution. He's a full participant. I was glad to see him, get a couple of touchdowns today in red zone work. They were using him out of the slot there. I think that's where he's really valuable. But, he's one of those versatile guys that can move outside as well. I was glad to see that. But one of the guys I'm really stoked to see in the slot is Demario Douglas. Now, you reported that, you got off a report that, Ty Montgomery's working in the slot. That might take away some of his reps. But this kid, Douglas, even though he's really undersized, I watched the tape of him, and boy, he seems electric. And he might not be ready this year. He might be a practice.
Yeah, he might be a practice squad guy, but I unless he really flames out, Steve, I think he at least is a practice squad player that you look at again next summer, at the very least.
Yeah, and you stash him on the practice squad, and if somebody gets dinged up, you activate him and give him a chance to see what he can do. I mean, I'm really excited to see him. I know a lot of people were excited about Keishon Butte, but he hasn't flashed as much yet. We'll see now that the pads are coming on. This might be his time to shine.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I think for me. Another guy that I'm going to be I'm questioning what the heck the plan for Marte Mapu is. What is he a linebacker? Is he a safety? He's worked with both. Matthew Judon has had some high praise for Mapu, saying that he looks like a safety, moves like a safety, moves like a defensive back, but can hit like a linebacker. Is physical like a linebacker. He's kind of a unique piece. I just feel like they have so many safeties, Steve. I just would be very disappointed if they didn't use him more in that linebacker role. I want to see them use, and I talked about this player for the Patriots to potentially target in free agency, former Buffalo Bill, got a big money deal in Chicago, Tremaine Edmonds from the Bills. And I want to see Marte Mapu used like him, have some speed in the middle. It's a perfect complement to Juwan Bentley. And, you're talking about having a nice kind of little thunder and lightning there in the middle of your team as you're rotating your edge players. I would love to see him moved all over the board. And I think the plan is interesting, Steve, because part of me feels like I know Bill is only. I think his. I don't want to speak for Bill. I'm not going to speak for Bill. Okay, but we've both been following the team for a long time, and I don't feel like this is out of turn for me to say. I think for rookies, he likes to put like very small amount on their plate until they've proven that they can handle that, and then he expands it. So my thought from Bill's perspective, what I think Bill's thinking about Mapu is, I should say, is I think that he will start him wherever they think he profiles best, and then they will, if that's safeties, then they'll start him there, and then maybe they'll give him some linebacker stuff next. But he has to take on each thing, and build on it. That's how I think he'll approach it with Mapu, Steve.
Bill's always done it that way, and I expect the same thing. Now, in the spring, there was reports of him doing all kinds of stuff, and I think they were just testing that out to see, his football intelligence, how fast he processes stuff. From all accounts, he passed that pretty well, but I think they'll dial that back a little bit in training camp. That seems usually the way. They'll just give him one specific role at first and see, when the pads come on, how well he does that, and then go from there. But I think by the end of this season, I think he's going to be used a lot. Maybe not so much at the beginning of the season. We might just see sprinkles of him early, but I think by the end of the season, we're going to see a lot of him on the field.
Right. No, I'm right there. I'm right there with you.
And like you, I'm so stoked to see how they use this guy, because Belichick has always found roles for guys that nobody saw coming. I mean, he's done this with a lot of players. Some of them were high draft picks elsewhere. I mean, Kyle Van Noy flamed out in Detroit. The Patriots picked him up, and it was kind of a ho-hum move at the time. And then look how he turned out. So, and there was a couple other examples of guys like that. Mapu, he wasn't a draft pick, but Bill's had good luck with undrafted guys.
Yeah, no, he certainly has. Certainly, they have found a lot of diamonds in the rough over the years. Certainly, so I don't want to understate that. I would also, well, let's go back to you. I mean, if you have anything else on your mind, any more big questions that you have surrounding the team, or anything that you as a talking point, perhaps?
Well, let me rephrase that. Mapu wasn't a high draft pick. I mean, he was a mid-round guy. What was he?
Third round. I mean, I still.
Oh, he was
I think top
round.
three. I think top three rounds are still considered relatively high draft picks.
Yeah, I thought he was a fourth rounder. Okay, yeah, he was picked in the third, number 76.
Yeah, because it was Gonzalez, Keon, and then Mapu.
But anyway, I have high hopes for him. The guy that is kind of really flying under the radar is Keon White.
Sure.
And I want to see how he adapts in his first year in the NFL. I think internally there's a lot of high hopes for him, but he hasn't got hardly any press at all.
So, no, he's flying way under the radar.
Yeah.
And what do you think that is, Steve? I mean, I don't know. I go back and forth on it. I mean, I'm not trying to hijack your take here, but we're not really, and maybe it's because he's a quiet guy. I mean, when he was drafted, the video of him being drafted, he just looked pissed. People say that he's just a quiet dude, doesn't really have a lot. Apparently he has a passion for real estate. And, that's pretty much all I heard about him for the offseason was that he's into real estate. And that's where he's going to spend a lot of his time and money out off the football field. But I've heard that he looks the part. Paul Perillo talked about that on Patriots.com. I mean, he certainly looks the part. And I don't know, Steve. I mean, I want to combine what I was about to say with your point. I'll let you take over because this was your jumping off point. But what I was going to say next was some questions I have are the young defensive pieces they have on the team. We talked about Mapu. You talk about Keon White. You talk about Christian Gonzalez. You talk about potential. I'd still throw Josh Uche, kind of in that mix. You talk about Kyle Duggar. Some of those guys are known. Some of those guys have proven a little bit, and some of those guys are unknowns. And if Christian Barmore should be in that conversation,
absolutely.
If these guys can all or almost all of them start to reach their potential and trend upwards, you're talking about a very good nucleus of a defense. And I think that's where the question's going to be. Christian Barmore's in the third year. Great first year, injury plague, kind of slow second year, still had some potential. Josh Uche skyrocketed last year. Can he match it? Mapu, where's he going to play? Christian Gonzalez looks fluid. You watch that guy backpedal and flip his hips, and it's like smooth as butter. I mean, he has it. Sure, he's gotten beat a couple times early in camp. Wake me up when, like, a couple of weeks from now, when that's an issue. Okay, I'm not worried about things like that. Kyle Duggar on the precipice of a big payday. We just talked about it. And I'm sure I'm forgetting several other guys. But my point is that I want to integrate into your point, Steve, is that, they have a ton of young defensive players that I think Patriots fans really need to be crossing their fingers that these guys ascend. Because if they do, I think you're going to be really solid on that side of the ball for years to come.
Absolutely. You and I have talked about this at length during the off season. The pieces are all there. They just need them to come together. I think Duggar is a star in the wings. I think he's going to be a perennial Pro Bowl type of guy. Barmore is the guy that if he can stay healthy and put it all together, he can be extremely disruptive. We've seen it in spurts, but he hasn't been able to do it consistently because of his health. This is a big year for him too. And, guys like Keon White, Christian Gonzalez, Mapu, they just drafted these guys. Another guy, Jelani Tavai, who we didn't think much of, and he proved us all wrong last year once the season started. He's just still a fairly young guy, as well as Bentley. So, those guys are Uche. They're the future. Guys like Judon, Judon still playing at extremely high level, but he's on the other side of 30 now, and you can't expect him to do that forever. So there's going to have to be guys that step up, and guys like Uche or Keon White, they're going to have to pick up the slack there. And so I'm really excited to see these young guys on defense. And I think, again, the defense is going to be faster and better than they were last year. I thought last year they were pretty good. I know a lot of people said, well, they didn't do well against the good teams. Well, that's why they're good teams. And plus, the offense wasn't giving them any breaks. So I think the defense is going to be very good this year. Yeah,
no, certainly. I think that's a good point, and an interesting one to kind of wrap up the show, Steve. I think that we have the one. I know some people don't like the preseason stuff. I kind of like it in a weird way because it doesn't. I know it's not really football, but I kind of like just to see what some of these young guys can do. Who pops, who flashes, and that's a nice part about being in camp too, seeing these guys that don't always get these reps, who steps out, and who stands out, and how guys move differently, because just because a guy has crazy speed doesn't mean he's as fast as you think he is. Or maybe it's someone like Bethel Johnson, who is fast, and then you see him on the field and you're like, and I'm going way back here, but you're like, holy crap, that guy's the next level. Or you see Randy Moss and you're like, this guy's long, his long strides, he's like just gliding past everybody. Or the physicality of a Brandon Browner, like you brought up, or whatever. Like, it's that's the fun part about this time of year. And the defensive players, I think there's a lot of them to watch. And again, I think they have some interesting guys there. So that'll be fun, and I didn't even talk about Marcus Jones when I was talking about that group, one of my favorite guys,
And Jack, Jack was on the field.
Yeah, so. That's a good point too. Jack was on the field, and that was surprising to me. I'm not going to lie. Thank you for bringing that up, because I meant to. I said, I thought he was going to end up on the commissioner's exempt list. I was surprised he was going to be out there. Not only was he out there, he was participating. Bill addressed it, kind of nipped it in the bud, and then didn't talk about it, which honestly is probably what he should be doing, and the kind of answer that he gets off on. But Jack was, running up and down the crowd sidelines, and we'll see. Hopefully it works out for him. What's up?
He was flexing for the crowd.
Yeah, he was out there having a good time. So, after making a pretty boneheaded move, hopefully this kind of settles him down and gets him refocused. Because I think we're all looking forward to a second year with both the Jones corners, which I didn't even mention in that young defensive core that we're talking about. So I'd like to see. I'm also really fascinated, Steve,
Three Joneses.
with my kind of final thoughts on the show. I'm also really curious to see what Marcus Jones's role will be this year. I still think he'll be doing some punt returns, or doing some returns in general. I still think he'll be working in with the corners, but I'm curious how many snaps he gets a corner. Does he still have a couple of snaps in him on offense? Does he want to do that? I would hope he does, because yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not saying you're gonna make him a full-time offensive player, but I think having him and utilizing his run after catch ability is critical. The ball in his hands, he was electric with it. We saw it last year multiple times. So something to think about, Steve. I don't know. Any final thoughts for you on the show?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great point on Marcus, because as you put it, he was electric with the ball in his hand, and we saw it with his returns. That touchdown catch against Buffalo, I mean, that was dynamic stuff there, and it speaks volumes about how bad the Patriots were last year, when your most dynamic player on offense was your cornerback.
Yep.
So,
certainly.
But this year, I think things are going to be different. I'm really stoked for Tyquan Thornton this year. I don't think he was utilized right last year. I think in this O'Brien offense, we're going to see a lot more of him. And one thing we haven't heard much about, at least yesterday and today so far, I haven't seen much about Mike Gesicki or Hunter Henry. So something to keep an eye on with those two guys.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I have some really high hopes for Gesicki in this offense. I'm looking forward to what he brings to the table, for this offense, and I'm fascinated to see what Bill O'Brien's offense looks like, to start the year. I'm really excited for that. One of my things that I'm looking forward to the most. But I would be remiss if I didn't once again ask for everyone who's listening, watching, please subscribe to us on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Please like, share, leave us a review. Keeps us high in the podcast ranking so other Patriots fans can find us. For Steve Balestrieri, I am Derek Havens again, brought to you by PatsFans.com. Please check out PatsFans.com for a ton of great content. Our other host, Russ Goldman, is doing a lot of solo shows now with he's doing a lot of solo shows now, kind of bringing up some talking points. He was highlighting some of the things that he was looking forward to in training camp. Steve and I will still continue to do our weekly shows. And then Russ is going to work in a couple of shows on himself. So we're going to bring you more content here on Patriots 4th and 2. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to continuing to watch training camp and see where this whole thing goes. But we appreciate you watching today, and we'll talk to you guys next week. See you then.
Go Pat.